right, artists. This afternoon we are going to learn how to use watercolor paints. We're going to work from a watercolor paint pan or paint palette like this that you can, buy at any store. And these are the pigments or the colors. It's the paint. With watercolor paint, the key word here is water. We need to add the water to the pigment to activate it. You want a lot of water, hence the word watercolor. But first let's talk about brushes. Not all paintbrushes are created equal. For watercolor paint, we want a watercolor paintbrush. I tell students all the time, watercolor paintbrushes are soft. They're fluffy, kind of like a makeup brush. It feels good against your skin. It's not stiff. You can even hear these ones. They're stiff. These bristles are hard and stiff. These are better for acrylic and tempera paint. Don't use these for watercolor. The reason you want the nice fluffy ones that don't make noise is because they're going to soak up all that good water. All right? The next thing that you need to know about watercolor paint is transparent. That means see-through. So in order to activate our paint, you want water. Get a nice, fresh, clean cup of water, put your paintbrush in there and get it nice and wet. It should be a good, fat, fluffy one like this, or one that can hold a lot of water. And I'm gonna start with maybe this color here. So I just wanna take water, and see there's so much water in my paintbrush. See how it's just dripping into that pan? So I just wanna fill that pan up with water, kind of let it activate the pigment to release the color. I'm gonna do the same thing over here with the yellow. Now for the sake of our demonstration, I will probably use darker colors so you can see them. But just take the time first to just take your paintbrush, load it with clean water, dip it into the pans of the colors you want to use to activate those colors, and then let them sit for a little while. Now the reason that I want to do this with all the colors right now that I want to use instead of working with one color and then rinsing it and then doing the next is this way clean water is going in here to activate my pigment. If I used blue and then rinsed my paintbrush and then wanted to activate the yellow, well, the yellow wouldn't be yellow anymore because the water has a blue tint to it. So you want to make sure you activate these colors before you do any painting. All right, I'm not going to use white, I'm not going to use brown, and I'm not going to use black. Depending on your set of watercolor paints, you may or may not have those colors. All right, now these are all wet, they're releasing the pigment, and they're going to be really vibrant and ready for us to paint with. So what we're going to do today is just about practicing. This lesson, you guys are just learning how to use watercolor paint. So I'm going to teach you a couple techniques to do with watercolor. In your supplies, you got watercolor paper. It's the thicker, smaller paper, not the good drawing, but it's a little bit heavier. It's going to hold the water better. So I'm going to start by doing a technique called wet on wet. This is where we use we wet the paper, and then we put wet paint on top. And it's a great way to make a sky, to blend colors. So probably for this exercise, what I'm going to do is maybe divide my paper into fourths, maybe sixths. I'm just going to kind of paint a little square here. So the first step is to take clean water again, and I'm just wetting my paper. I'm painting with clean water. So I have a square here of water. Before that dries, I want to pick up some color. So I'm going to load my paintbrush with color. I don't jam it in there and smush it into the pigment. You just drag it gently across the top where the puddle is to pick up the paint. And then I can look at how beautiful that color is. It's vibrant. And this is what happens when you wet the paper and then you put wet paint on top. You can make a beautiful sky or ocean this way. I just love how the color just blends. Now, again, with watercolor paint, it's transparent. So you don't want your color too dark. If it gets too dark, then you're not using it correctly. You don't have enough water in there and you're just adding pigment. Now I'm going to wipe my paintbrush on my rag. I always like to have a rag. And these little puddles here, I always tell my students, wipe your paintbrush so that it's almost dry, and we can vacuum those puddles up because we don't want big blobs and puddles of pigment or water on our paper. So we just vacuum them up with a dry paintbrush that I just dried off on my rag. Now we're going to let that dry, and let's do another technique. So now if you have a white crayon at home, this is a really fun technique called wax resist. The key is you have to push hard with your crayon because you want the wax to stick to the paper, and then we'll see what happens. Oops, I broke my crayon. We'll see what happens when we paint over this area. It should, what I drew should show through. I'm gonna kind of wipe extra wax away. Let me use a different paintbrush just to show you how different paintbrushes can look. So this one's not quite as puffy as the other one, but again, I'm dragging my paintbrush across the top, just in that puddle. I'm not digging into the pigment. And now, whoa, look at that. I love how the wax resists the paint. All right, that's wax resist. That's a really fun way to draw, like if you want something white. It's hard in watercolor paint. We don't paint with white, but if you want something white, draw it or color it in with a white crayon. So this is called wax resist. Wax, X, right? Wax resist. All right. Look at this wet on wet, how it is just blending. Wouldn't that make a beautiful sky? Okay, let's do blotting. I like to use the blotting technique also to make, is it 2 T's? Blotting. This is why I went into art, because I don't spell very well. So to blot, you could use anything from tissue. Sponges work nice for blotting. It's going to look different. The trick is, if you use a sponge, get it wet first so that it's soft, and then squeeze all the water out of it. So I'll use both just to show you what they look like. You can also use a dry paintbrush for blotting. So now I'm going to do dry paper. I'm going to put the color right on the paper. I'll use green this time, and again, just drag that paintbrush right on top. And I'm just going to lay down some color. Like maybe this is some grass. Now remember also, when you use watercolor paint, to pull your paintbrush. We don't ever push our paintbrush, we pull it. And I'm just laying down a field of color. And if I want to, I can use my paintbrush to blot the color out. All I have to do is dry, rinse, and then dry that paintbrush, and I can blot the color out. I could use a different paintbrush, one that hasn't gotten wet yet, to pull the pigment out with. This paintbrush is actually dirty. Somebody didn't rinse it very well. Now let's try it with the sponge. That looks kind of neat, how it makes the shape of the sponge. So this is a fun way to also make different marks and to lighten things up in your painting. Let's try another color. Let's see, orange. So I'll put some orange down here next to or underneath my green. And of course, the more pigment you have, the darker the color will be. But again, we don't want so much pigment that the color is so dark we can't see the paper coming through. Okay, while it's still wet, this is the key to blotting. Once the paint is dried, you can't blot it up. So the paint has to be wet. Look at that. That could be the body of a sheep or a lamb. I love it. Or a cloud. This is so fun to just experiment and explore with. I like using blotting sometimes to make flowers. So I could paint a background and then I can blot out and then maybe outline with a Sharpie some flowers in here. Blotting is really just a fun way to explore. So that's blotting. Again, you can use a lot of different things with blotting. Let's also do toothbrush. If you have an old toothbrush laying around the house, these are really fun to use with watercolor paint. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a light color like yellow. And I'm just going to do a wash. This is called a wash. So you're doing dry paper underneath, and you're just taking color and you're washing it across the paper. So this is a great way to fill in a large area. But now I want to add some texture to that wash. Say this is the side of a barn, but I want it to look like it has texture. So now I'm going to take my paintbrush, my toothbrush, I'm going to get it wet, and I'm going to take some purple, and again, I'm just gently putting it in that puddle of water. If there's no more water in your pigment, put more in there. Just drop some more water in those pigment trays to keep them liquidy. Okay, I'm just gently, I'm not pushing it into the pigment, I'm just gently dipping it into the puddle there of color. So it's on there. Now I'm going to take my finger and I'm just going to run it across the bristles with the bristles facing my yellow. Whoa. Okay, now this is really cool because my yellow was wet, so it just blended in, kind of like my wet on wet up here. I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to do another one with it dry, and we'll see how that looks. All right, now I'm going to take my paintbrush, toothbrush, and just wipe it clean on my rag. Okay, let's see. Here's another technique that we can use. If you have Q-tips laying around the house, these are really fun. You don't even need a paintbrush. You could just take your Q-tip, dip it in the color, and you can paint. Say you want details of, well, I don't know if you're doing an underwater scene, maybe seaweed. So that's kind of fun too, to put the paint on a Q-tip. And then I'm going to use a different color, so I'm going to flip it over. Maybe I'll go across this way. Kind of looks like waves. So be creative with even the materials you work with. So this is just working with a Q-tip, and look at how all of a sudden that kind of looks like waves. It looks like a great river. I love it. And what was the last technique I was going to show you? Mrs. Williams can't remember right now. Oh, I remember, dry brush. Okay, dry brush is really, takes a lot of practice. It's really a learned skill. So what you want to do is have a dry paintbrush. Make sure you haven't gotten it in the water yet. And then you're going to take darker pigments, again, work better. And I'm just very lightly going to touch my paintbrush in that paint. And the idea is that we want to kind of spread the bristles out a little bit, and then just very lightly you're dragging it across the paper. Don't even know if you guys can see that, but this is how you could make grass or fur. This is a great technique for making fur or hair. Now see here, I can tell all that pigment there, this is too wet. So I'm just going to kind of dab it a little bit. Spread my bristles out a little bit, and then again, lightly, it's a very light, gentle touch. I'm just dragging my paintbrush across here. And again, this is a tough technique. I like to show it to you just so that you can see how it looks. It's a little bit easier sometimes if you use the pigments that maybe don't have a lot of water in them, and you're just touching the very tip. Like, let's see, you guys can't see that. Touch the very tip here, and then again, pull. See how it kind of looks like grass, fur, hair. But again, we're just practicing. And that's what this week is all about with watercolors, just practice. And then you guys can find things to do. You can figure out different things to do too. Explore, experiment, see what techniques work for you, what you like. And then next time you will make your own painting of an object using watercolor. So have fun today, artists, exploring different watercolor techniques.